Cathedral in the Night has been ministering to the homeless and anyone inclined to worship out of doors in Northampton for the past 6 years every week, regardless of weather. This opportunity to worship will be coming to Greenfield's Town Common on Sunday, September 11th at 2 p.m. and will be present every Sunday afternoon. The service is followed by a community meal and will be called Cathedral in the Light.
People that are used to going to church inside are used to sitting down and sitting still for long periods of time. And unfortunately, for a lot of people who are marginalized, indoor spaces can often be really limiting and restricting. If you are someone who is living with a mental illness that makes it impossible for you to sit still, it might not necessarily be as welcoming a community as we might think. And doing church outside means that it is literally accessible to anyone that wants to come. If you want to come for 5 minutes, if you want to stay for the entire time. We also make it clear that it's a safe space for anyone from any walk of life. And so if you've been harmed by the church before, it's a lot less intimidating to go to church when it's in your familiar park bench as opposed to sitting there with a big altar or a big choir or a person in a robe. It's much more familial and it's much more familiar.
One of the things that we often talk about is that it seems as though people like to talk about the literal wisdom of the Bible. And one of the things that's interesting about that is it often gets overlooked in terms of what Jesus actually did. And when you take literally what Jesus did, Jesus left the temple and left the synagogue for the streets. And so the gospel stories are really stories about the way Jesus ministered to people outdoors, around a meal, going to the marginalized and finding God there, not only for the sake of the marginalized themselves, but also for the sake of those people who are re-finding God in the context of their tradition. And so what we find striking is that Christianity began, and we believe sort of ends, out of doors, ministering to people who need one another in order to find God. And so the importance of not having walls for us is that it means that no one is excluded. And one of the mantras that we say all the time at the beginning of the service is that the table that we gather around for communion and the substantive meal is not any one person's table. It's not the clergy's table. It's not people who attend there. It is the table of God, and as the table of God, no one can be excluded, because the moment that someone is excluded, it ceases to be the fullness of God's table.
And it says in Romans 5:8, "But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinning." So even in the moment that you did something you weren't proud of, the worst thing you can think of, that's when he loved you the most. And many times we feel like our good deeds will somehow get us closer to God, but really what that does is a disservice to us, because if we think we can somehow win God's affection, then we're not free to live in just the beauty of the fact that it's a gift, and that this extravagant love is given to us without any of our efforts. And so what we learned from this story, and the phrase that I really want you guys to all hang on to today, is that there is nothing we can do to make God love us more, and there's nothing that we can do to make him love us less. Because he loves us not because of the good or bad things we do, but because he's our Father. And so if you're on that ladder trying to win God's approval or feeling like you can't climb high enough, maybe it's time to step off of the ladder and realize that God has already come down for us, and he's longing to embrace us.
Your opportunity for open worship at Cathedral in the Light coming Sunday, September 11th at 2 p.m. on Greenfield's Town Common. And remember to keep checking back to gctv.org for ongoing community coverage.